All right, First John chapter 2, we are picking up where we left off. And so I hope that you have your Bibles and that we are going to look at or pick up there in verse 7. All right, so we there, First John chapter 2, verse 7. Beloved, I am writing you no new commandment, but an old commandment that you had from the beginning. The old commandment is the word that you have heard. At the same time, it is a new commandment that I am writing to you, which is true in him and in you, because the darkness is passing away and the true light is already shining. Whoever says he is in the light and hates his brother is still in darkness. Whoever loves his brother abides in the light, and in him there's no cause for stumbling. But whoever hates his brother is in the darkness, and walks in the darkness, and does not know where he is going, because the darkness has blinded his eyes. Verse 12, I am writing to you, little children, because your sins are forgiven for his name's sake. I am writing to you, fathers, because you know him who is from the beginning. I am writing to you, young men, because you have overcome the evil one. I write to you, children, because you know the Father. I write to you, fathers, because you know him who is from the beginning. And I write to you, young men, because you are strong, and the word of God abides in you, and you have overcome the evil one. All right, so that's a mouthful. All right, what in the world is John talking about here as we picked up where we left off from last week? And hopefully you can, if you've been with us each week, you can identify some of the same themes, right? John's talking about the same stuff over and over again. Remember that the New Testament letters and really all of the scriptures, there's no chapter breaks, there's no verse breaks, there's no paragraphs. This is just one long letter that John is writing. And so we, even though we're going week to week, we still pick up on some of the same themes. So he's talking about light here. He was talking about that in chapter 1. He's talking about darkness. All right, he's talking about love. He's talking about hate. But then he's also talking about this idea of an old commandment and a new commandment. All right, and so there seems to be some things that John is doing here that we kind of want to key in on a little bit. What is he talking about, and how does this fit in the overall part of his letter? Always, always, always study the Bible in the context in which it was written. It's very easy for you and I to come in here week by week to pick up a little section of a letter, a little paragraph, or one little word, and just sort of pull it out of its original meaning, and we just sort of look at it, and we can sort of be led astray if we're not careful. If we're not looking at the overall context. So we have to remember, week to week, we have to remember like the broader context of what John is talking about here. So remember, John, we've hit on this almost every week now. John is writing these things in the context of fellowship with God and fellowship with one another. Don't lose that. All right, he's not changing subjects. Even though there might be a new chapter, it's not a new thought. All right, so all these things are similar. And we've already talked about how that fellowship means that we are moving away from sin and we're moving towards holiness. That's the kind of fellowship that John is talking about. Fellowship means that we are walking in the light. Talked about this in chapter 1. We're not walking in the darkness anymore. Fellowship means that we are simply being obedient to God's commands. So that's one of the things, we talked about this a lot last week. All right, so up until this point, there's a little transition in this section, all right? And up until this point, we may be tempted to think that the theme of 1 John is fellowship. But it's not. All right, that's not the overall purpose. That's what he's been talking about a lot so far, but that's not the theme of the letter. And certainly he's talked about that a lot, right? He's defined what fellowship is. We know what it means. But then he's also talked about how we experience that. How do we experience fellowship with God day in and day out? But now there's something here in this section that we begin to realize John is addressing a bigger subject. He's addressing something more than just fellowship. When I go up to visit somebody's house, or when I go to visit somebody and I walk up to their house, I always walk up to the front door and either knock on the door or ring the doorbell. And the person comes to the door and they see me and I see them. And there's always this brief introduction, right? Hey, how are you? I'm fine. How are you doing? You know, and there's a few words that are exchanged in that brief conversation at the door. But my purpose for going to visit somebody at their home is not to have a brief conversation at the door, right? I want to go in and I want to sit down either in the living room or around the kitchen table, or close to the coffee pot or wherever that is. Like, my purpose in going to visit somebody in their home is not just to have that little brief interaction. My purpose is to go in and just share and just kind of spend some time together with them. And John's opening words and opening theme of fellowship is kind of like being at the front door, knocking on the front door and having a little conversation with you. But there's a greater purpose for the letter. And so it's almost like up until this point, we've had a little conversation at the door. So John's about to invite us in and set us down in the living room and have a conversation with us about a broader and bigger subject, and really more important subject in his letter than fellowship. So what John is doing in this passage, and it's going to be like this all the way to the very end, John wants us to understand that the broader message in his letter is not about fellowship, it's about love. That's the overall purpose of John's letter. It's about love. All right, it is a love letter. It is a letter of love. We're going to see love and hear love and talk about love, and certainly that does go along with some of the fellowship that he has talked about. But the message of 1 John is very simple, and I've got some of these are on your handouts tonight. The message from John is this to the readers. You and I are the readers. He's written this to a group of Christians 2,000 years ago, but we understand it's written to us. Right? It was preserved, written, inspired by the Holy Spirit, so it's for us. So the letter is for us. It's for you and I today at Cedar Creek Baptist Church in 2025. And here's what John is saying in this letter. If you have experienced genuine saving faith, two things will happen. One, you will obey God, and two, you will love one another. All right, so this is the message of the letter. That if you're a Christian, if you're a follower of Christ, not if you're a church member, not if you've walked an aisle, not if you've said a prayer, not if you've been baptized, not if you're just this good moral person, all right, you're a Christian in name only. No, he's saying if you are a believer, if you're a follower of Jesus Christ, genuinely saved, two things have to happen in your life. One, you're going to obey God. We've already talked about that. He spelled that out last week. All right? You will obey God. Will you fail? Yes, but you'll get back up and you'll keep wanting to obey God. All right? If you love me, you will keep my commandments. You will obey me. All right? But also, now he's going to sort of key in on this idea that if you have experienced genuine saving faith, not only will you love God and obey Him, but you will love one another. This is a test. This is a measure of whether or not we have been genuinely saved. All right, so there's nothing. I know sometimes we make it complicated. There's nothing complicated about what it means to be saved. All right, being a Christian is very simple. It is very, very simple. Becoming a Christian, living as a Christian, can be very difficult. Right? I think there's a little box on your handouts there that asks a question. According to most Christians, or for most Christians, people would say, or would you agree, that following Jesus is difficult? Do you believe that living as a Christian is something that is hard to do? How would you answer that? Sometimes it's hard to do, sometimes it's not hard to do. Would y'all agree with that? Why is it hard to do? Let's say that again. You can't always love your neighbor. Okay? Okay? I feel sorry for those of you who live next to the chapels. Yeah, you don't have. But that's true. Yeah, your spouse is your first neighbor. That's right. It's not hard to become a Christian, but it is difficult to live to follow Jesus. Now, hold your finger in 1 John. I want you to turn to Luke chapter 14. All right? So there's a couple other passages that we're going to look at tonight. One's in Luke 14, the other's in Leviticus. If you want to go ahead and find your place there too, because we're going to look at Leviticus chapter 19 in just a minute. All right, Luke 14. All right, and we're thinking about this question, is it hard or why is it hard? Is it difficult or why is it difficult to follow Jesus? All right, and somebody read that. Somebody read, it doesn't matter who it is, read Luke 14, the reference is there, 25 through 33. Somebody read that. A person who does not give up everything that they have. Some of your translations may say renounce. All right, Jesus uses some strange and strong language at the beginning of that. Anyone who does not hate his father, his mother, his brother, his sister, like we read that and go, wait a minute, Jesus wants me to hate my family in order to follow him? That's not what he means. He uses or explains himself at the end of that passage by the word renounce. And what he means there is that, very simply, if you want to follow me, you have to be willing to turn your back on everything and everybody else. You have to be willing to die. And certainly that's what he means in Luke chapter 9, right? If anybody wants to follow me, let them take up his cross, deny themselves, and follow me daily. All right? So, is it difficult to follow Jesus faithfully? Yes, it requires your death. It requires us to die to everything that we want, and everything that we feel like we deserve. It requires daily death to what we want so that we can follow Christ. So there's a great cost. And what Luke was writing here, what Jesus was talking about is you have to consider. He was using these illustrations about a king and one who was building. You have to consider before you engage in this great thing that you're doing. You have to consider how much it's going to cost you. You don't go and start building a house and you don't think about how much it's going to cost you, or plan this great event. You don't think about the price tag. So Jesus is saying, if you want to follow me, you better consider how much it's going to cost you. And it's going to cost you everything. Right? But it's in the death to self that you find the joy of what it means to be alive. That's where you find real life, is when you die to self. All right? So, is it hard to follow Jesus? Of course it's hard. It requires you to die to yourself. All right? So, loving God, obeying God, loving your neighbor as yourself. All right? So, John then brings up this idea of this old commandment and new commandment. All right? In verses 7 and 8 here. And we need to understand what he's talking about here. This old commandment and this new commandment, how does it fit into that? At first, doesn't it sound like John is contradicting himself? All right? The commandment I'm giving you, or writing to you, is an old commandment. It's not a new commandment. And then in verse 8, he says, well, it kind of is a new commandment. Right? It's not an old commandment. This is something that so we need to understand. Of course, he's not contradicting himself. We need to understand what he is talking about. So, verse 7, it's an old commandment because God has always commanded his people to love. Right? Leviticus 19. Let's go there. All right? You know where Leviticus is. If you need to turn to the concordance in the front, that's okay. Nobody's going to judge you. All right? It's the third book from the front. All right? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. All right? I know so many of you did your quiet time in Leviticus this morning, so you know where it is. All right? Leviticus chapter 19. With this thought, God has always commanded his people to love. Leviticus 19, and we're going to get my glasses out of the way. We're going to start at verse 9. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap your field right up to its edge, neither shall you gather the gleanings after your harvest. Let's stop right there. Why? What's the point in that? You'll not glean right up to the edge. Verse 10. You shall not strip your vineyard bare, neither shall you gather the fallen grapes of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the foreigner or the sojourner. I am the Lord your God. Verse 11. You shall not steal. You shall not deal falsely. You shall not lie to one another. You shall not swear by my name falsely and so profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. You shall not oppress your neighbor or rob him. The wages of a hired worker shall not remain with you all night until the morning. You shall not curse the deaf or put a stumbling block before the blind, but you shall fear your God. I am the Lord. You shall do no injustice in court. You shall not be partial to the poor or defer to the great, but in righteousness you shall judge your neighbor. And you shall not go around as a slanderer among your people. You shall not stand up against the life of your neighbor. I am the Lord. You shall not hate your brother in your heart. But you shall reason frankly with your neighbor, lest you incur sin because of him. And you shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. So all the way back in the Levitical law, God has always commanded His people to love. God's law has always been about love. So when John says, this is an old commandment that you've heard. Well, he's talking to Jews mainly who knew the law. They knew this. They knew the Levitical law. They had heard the law say, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So it's not a new commandment to them. They knew that this was what John was talking about. God's law has always been about love. On your handouts it says, it is a new commandment because we now see a deeper and fuller extent to God's love through Jesus. So it's an old law, or an old commandment, but there's something new about the old commandment. Right? And something new about the old commandment is Jesus. Right? And John is referencing that here. Before, God's love was written in the law. We just read that, Leviticus 19. Be careful about taking care of your neighbor. Make sure that when you reap the harvest and you do this, you go testify in court and you clean off your leave some for the people around you and take care of your neighbor. All right, look out for people that are worse off than you. God's love was written in the law. That's what John means in verse 7. But now, John says, now God's love was walking around with us. That's Jesus. All right? So this is the meaning of verse 7 and verse 8. God's love was written in the law, the entire law, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, the Ten Commandments, all of that. It's all about love. God's love. But now John says the reason that it's a new commandment is that this love that the law pointed to, it became a human being. And it got flesh on it and it started living and with us, and we touched it and we saw it and we felt it and we heard it. And so that is the new part of this commandment, is that Jesus is here, and it's through the ministry of Jesus, through the life of Jesus, the teaching of Jesus, the death of Jesus on the cross, the resurrection, all of that. That's the new part of this commandment that he's talking about. So what the Old Testament law revealed through love, all right, and all the instructions there, John says now in the New Testament, we see this greater, we see this bigger, this fuller picture of what the Old Testament law promised. Every law in the Old Testament pointed forward to Jesus. It's not some strange, like the Old Testament is not relevant anymore. You have some pastors out there saying that, hey, the Old Testament law doesn't matter anymore, and we just need to be New Testament people. And that's so wrong. That's so wrong, because all of the Old Testament law points forward to Jesus. It's a shadow of something that was coming later, and something that was greater. So you think about the law, right? You think about the civil laws, You think about the ceremonial laws, you think about the moral law, all of this stuff that we see in the Old Testament, the sacrificial system, all of these covenants, right? All of the really weird stuff, if I could say that affectionately, the strange stuff about the law. I don't know if you've read some of the Levitical law lately, but like some of it's weird. Like there's some strange stuff. In fact, let me ask you, if you've studied and know anything, is there anything in one of the Old Testament laws, does one of them or a few of them stand out to you as just being really weird? If you've known them and you've studied them, like, can you think of any Old Testament law that just seems to be really strange as to why that was given? You think of any? Okay. So the dietary restrictions, what you eat, like that was a big deal, and we read that and go, why did God say no pork? You know, it makes me think I'm glad I'm not Jewish, because you know, a pig is delicious, right? But there was a reason that God said no pork, right? The pig is probably one of the filthiest animals that you can eat. And I don't want to start talking about bacon and sausage because I haven't had supper tonight. But yeah, that's the straight. Can anybody think of any other law in the Old Testament that just seems weird to us? Yep.
Well, all the different sacrifices.
Okay.
That you had to do. If you did this wrong, you had to bring a bird. If you did that wrong, you had to bring a goat or a perfect lamb or something.
Yes. Yep. And the way that it was sacrificed, and like, you know, the innards of it and how it was burned, and I mean all of that. Yeah, that seems strange. Anybody else have a weird? Yep.
I think the way that women were unclean to go off by themselves.
Yep. That seems. Did you know? I think this is like Leviticus 12, somewhere around there. That if a mother gave birth to a boy, you couldn't go to church for 33 days. But if a mother gave birth to a girl, you couldn't go to church for 66 days. Like that just seems weird to me. Like why is all? But it's there. That's Leviticus chapter 12, all right? And then we mentioned the dietary restrictions. They had laws about making sure that you didn't mix fabrics. Like you couldn't have wool and flax together in a fabric. Like that's just weird to me. Yep.
You use these pots for this and these pots for that, and you didn't let the other two get in the wrong.
That's right. All of that. You couldn't plant two different types of seed in a field. You couldn't mix the seeds. Right? And we don't want to get in. I don't know if we have any young ears here, but we don't want to get in. There's like tons of verses and laws about the sexual relationship. Like it's all, you think Song of Solomon is about that part. There's all kind of stuff in Leviticus like, what is this about? Right? But it's there. It's all right there. We can look at that and go, well, that's kind of silly, but we need to step back from it and go, why? Why have all of those types of laws? It's about love. God loved His people so much, He did not want them to eat food that would hurt them. Which is why He said you cannot eat food from an animal that has a split hoof. All right? So there's a reason. There's a reason for all of these things. But the point of what John is saying now, that all of that stuff has been fulfilled by the person of Jesus Christ. We don't have to do those things anymore. The only law that carries over from the Old Testament into the New Testament is the moral law. The civil laws have gone away. The ceremonial laws, those have gone away. Don't come in here next week and say, well, you know what, you're wearing a shirt that has wool and flax in it, and so you're not welcome here, right? None of that stuff matters anymore. But the point is that John says, look, this is an old commandment to love God, walk in the light, but also love your neighbor. But he wants them to see this old commandment in a new way. And that is through the life and ministry of Jesus. So he's pointing that out. He wants them to understand that. All right. According to John, also, words are not enough for you and I. All right? Why is he highlighting love? Why is love the theme? Why is 1 John a letter of love? Why is he coming back to this? He's going to come back to this next week. He's going to come back to this in chapter 3. Like all the way through the end of this letter, it's all going to be about love. Loving God and loving one another. Which, by the way, should sound familiar to us, right? Because Jesus said that's how you sum up the entire Old Testament. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. All right? So, John wants his readers to know what you say about knowing God and having fellowship with God and loving your brother or sister. What you say isn't enough. There's something about the way you live your life. Your life has to say something. This is why I love taking people, first-time Christians, people who are new in their faith, I love taking them through the letter of 1 John. Because this is sort of the foundation of what it means to be a Christian. To walk with Jesus, loving God and loving one another. And you can't separate those two things. So here's what John is doing here. He's saying, because words are not enough, living for God results in loving others. So if you're going to raise your hand and say, I want to live for God. I want to walk with God. I want to have fellowship with God. John says, if that's you, then that life should result in also loving other people. There's no such thing as loving God and not loving others. That's not genuine faith. That's not saving faith. But he also says that walking with God results in or produces fellowship, walking in fellowship with other people. All right? This is sort of a picture summary of verses 7 through 14. All right? We'll talk about verses 12, 13, and 14 in a minute. All right? So, according to John, obviously according to the Bible, there is no such thing as loving God but not loving God's people. That can't, John says that's impossible. That is totally foreign to the teaching of the New Testament about what saving faith is. If you are going to love God, you have to love God's people. Now, you may not love the Baptists. You may love the Methodists or the Pentecostals or somebody that maybe that's overseas. If you're somebody that lives, this is not just for American Christians, right? It's for Christians across the world. But there is to be a genuine love for the church. You can't say that you love God and say, well, I don't care about that church down there. Or have you heard people say this? Well, I don't need to go to church to be a Christian. Me and God, we have this unique relationship, and this has happened, and that church did this, and every time I go, that pastor talks about money, and that person did that, and this person did that, and I don't like what they do, and it's too hot, or it's too cold, or it's too loud, or whatever it may be, whatever, and I'm sure y'all have never heard any of those excuses, but you have people that say, well, I love God, I am a Christian. But if they never spend time with the people of God, if they don't love the people of God, I'm not saying this, John is saying this, then you don't love God. All right? So your love for the church, and we've got down here in the South, we got every shape and size church you could get. We've got all kinds of really good churches. If this church doesn't, not your cup of tea, there's some others that are. So, yes, Jared.
Well, I like the bluntness of 1 John chapter 4, verse 20 that says, if you say you love Jesus and hate your brother, you are a liar.
I mean, you can't say it any more black and white. All right? This is in chapter 4. So we're just in chapter 2. Like, this is going to be the same. He's going to say this over and over and over again. If you say you love God, but you don't love your brother, and we're going to talk about in the weeks ahead, what does love look like? I mean, I can say that I love Brother Jim, but how does my life prove that? What's the evidence of that? So he'll talk about that a little bit more. All right, so we'll wind up right here. We got just a couple minutes left as we understand what he's talking here. What he's talking about here. As we understand this, as we begin to put these things into practice, it's going to take some time and some patience and a lot of prayer and a lot of grace to walk well and love well. We're not going to get all this figured out in the first time we start walking with each other. All right? It will take a lot of time, grace, patience, prayer to begin to not just understand what he means here, but actually start doing these things. All right? And that's what, if you look at verses 12, 13, and 14, like what's going on here with the little children and the young men and the fathers, like what, and some of your Bibles may have this in poetry form instead of prose, like it looks a little different. What in the world is he talking about here? I don't think, some people, may have a little different view of this. I don't think John is writing to literal children, because he's already referred to us in verse 1, chapter 2, my little children. So he's talking to the church. He's not talking to tiny little humans, right? So I don't think he's talking about literal children. I don't think he's talking about literal fathers or literal young men. Certainly they are part of this group. But I think he's doing something else here. I think he's using these three things, little children, young men, and fathers, as categories of spiritual maturity. I think that's what he's doing here. All right, so not literal here, but he's talking about as we understand what it means to love God and walk in fellowship with God and to love one another, as we understand that and then we start putting it into practice, some of us are going to be children in the sense that we've never done that before. We got to learn how to do that. I love watching these little tykes, these little toddlers, and you walk around with them like this because you're worried that they're going to hit the ground, and sometimes they do. And when little children start to walk, they fall sometimes. But after they learn how, they grow up a little bit, they get a little bit more stable. Same thing in our spiritual walk. So sometimes we may be in the little children part of this. I'm writing to all of you, verse 12 here. Verse 13, I'm writing to those who are mature in the faith, fathers. All right, verse 13, I'm writing to those who are new in the faith, young men. So I think these are categories of spiritual maturity that he's saying, maturity that he's talking about here. And what he's saying, this is the last thing on your handouts, whether you are new to this Christian life or if you've been walking with the Lord for a long time, it all boils down to something very simple to remember: live in the light and walk in love. All right, that's verses 12, 13, and 14. All right. You're new, little children, or young men, or fathers, or you're growing in your faith, or wherever you are on the spectrum of spiritual maturity, what I want you to remember is to walk in fellowship, live in the light, stay away from the darkness. And he's explained what that is. Live in the light and walk in love. And if we will do those two things well, I may not ever know where Cain got his wife from. I may not be able to reconcile, predestination and free will and some of these things. I may not understand, the things that go on with eschatology and the end of the age and pre-mill and amill and when the rapture. I may not understand all of those things. But if I'm going to understand something, I better do these two things and do them well. That's what John wants this church to know. All right, in the midst of the Gnostics and the strange stuff and all these weird philosophies that swirling around them, John says, just keep it simple. What's that acronym KISS? K-I-S-S? Keep it simple, stupid? I'll edit that out of the video. All right, I'm not saying that to you. I'm saying that to me. Like that's how I like. Keep it simple. Don't complicate walking with the Lord. Stay in fellowship with Him and love one another. All right, and those are the things that God will use, and other people will see and go, I want to hang out with those people. Like there's something about him. There's something about her, whether it's at work or at school or wherever it may be. Like there's something attractive about walking in the light and just loving people. Isn't that one of the strengths of our church? You've been to any other churches lately? That is a blessing here that and sometimes, we have to be a little patient with others, and we don't always see eye to eye about stuff. And I get that. That's just a normal part of it. But there are people who are longing to be loved, to be a part of a church family that actually loves one another. And you get that and you do that well, and people want to be a part of that. And it honors the Lord. So, all right, so next week, we didn't get to any life principles, but we'll try to make some time for that next week. I know we always run out of time. Next week is just 3 verses, all right? A very familiar passage, verses 15, 16, and 17. So read, study, think, write, pray over that passage, and we'll come back next week and pick up right there. All right? Let me pray for us.